Excellent. Okay, so let's begin. Yeah, so we had begun discussing the Gemara on the Daf Tzadi Amud Aleph. So I want to get back to that and discuss these views. Then the next week or so, hopefully we'll shift back towards the beginning of the Masechta and discuss other aspects of Gittin. So the Mishnah here, everybody has it on Tzadi Amud Aleph? Tzadi Amud Aleph? Yeah?
Yes.
So the Mishnah says that Beis Shammai Omrim, Beis Shammai are of the opinion, that Lo Yigaresh Adam Esishto Elim Ken Matzaba Dvar Erba. That person, again, it's hard to know how to translate Lo Yigaresh. Means literally should not divorce. Does it mean that if he does it, it's an invalid divorce? Likely doesn't mean that, but it's possible. Does it mean that it's prohibited? Does it mean it's an Eitz Tova, meaning it's basically good advice, that this is not something that should be done? The word lo yigaresh here is
but how can you make a blanket rule? I mean, in other words, there are situations where it's so toxic you have to get divorced. I don't understand how that sounds like the priest, like the Catholics. You can't get divorced no matter
the
what.
Catholics say you can't get divorced under any conditions, but
I'm saying, but the Torah allows even for not a davar erba, right? A mechanism.
Well, we don't paskin like Beis Shammai, if that's what you mean. The question is, what did Beis Shammai have in mind?
Meaning, exactly. Meaning.
So Beis Shammai, there's a range. That's kind of what I'm addressing. The word lo yigaresh is ambiguous. So if you want to take Beis Shammai in the strictest way, it means that the only valid divorce is when there is a betrayal of the marriage contract. That's not a Catholic position, but it is a very limited option. And again, we don't paskin this way.
Well, there are 2 points of Beis Shammai. A is it legit if you do it, right? And that's A. And B is, let's say he agrees it works, but why would he psychologically set it up that way?
Well, psychologically, he's trying to protect the sanctity of the marriage. So again, you're already convinced because I've been, strongly, not just dropping hints, but I've been, kind of throwing out this idea that what looks like more trivial grounds or frivolous grounds for divorce, in the end of the day, are still productive. They're beneficial. Because number one, they eliminate, the feeling that, one is trapped, and that's a feeling that, generates, toxicity in its own right. I think I read last week the comment of the Malbim. The Malbim says that, if somebody, puts you in jail for a day, they say you're under house arrest or you're quarantined. So then, you become very antsy, and it becomes very, disturbing to you that you're confined, and you're just, chomping at the bit to break out. But if somebody says to you, there's no work today, there's a good chance that you're going to say, I can relax at home. So, because somebody imposed it on you when it was house arrest, you found it confining. And when you had, the option, you chose it. So the Malbim says, that's why there's so much flexibility, la halacha, in grounds for divorce. So that's one idea. Another idea
but
is the idea that
Beis Shammai really limits the whole idea of gerushin only bidvar erva.
No, I'm talking about Beis Hillel. Yeah, right.
What?
I was just explaining the position of Beis Hillel.
Yeah.
But the point is, I'm trying to answer Jacob's question. I think I did such a good job, or we did such a good job, that now it seems very draconian, to say what Beis Shammai says, which is like, how is it possible, that only in very narrow circumstances can you justify divorce? However, before we began, I'll tell you what what the Malbim asks. And if you look at the, somebody just showed me the other day, the Torah Tamima on this pasuk asks the same way, but the Rishonim already asked this question, the Pnei Yehoshua, among the Achronim. But what everybody asks is the opposite question. How can the Mishnah say, again, let's read the whole Mishnah first. Beis Shammai say, Lo yigaresh adam esishto elam ken matzah b'dvar erva, shenemar ken matzah b'ervas davar. Beis Hillel omrim, afilu hikdicha tavshilo, even if, she burns the food. Right? Shenemar ken matzah b'ervas davar. Rabbi Akiva says, avilu matzah echeres na hemena, shenemar v'haya imlo timtzachein b'einav. So what I'm saying is, most of the people who are troubled and disturbed are disturbed with Rabbi Akiva and Beis Hillel, who we paskin like, because they're saying, what, you're going to be so frivolous about a very serious, cherished, sanctified, institution in Jewish life, that you can just walk away so easily with a little bit of a burnt steak or a burnt stew, or a person who, improperly, cast his eye, on some other, individual in the context of his marriage. They're disturbed by that. So
isn't B'shad in the burnt stew that it's done purposely? I was taught. Meaning,
you were taught
it was more of a malicious.
I don't know when you were taught it, but we discussed it last week. But yeah. So I'm just saying, where your questions are good questions, but they're based on
information that you taught us,
on the information that we're in the middle of analyzing. So, which is fine. It's good that you've absorbed it. That's great. But I'm just saying, you have to understand that when you start off on the topic, the default difficulty is usually in the other direction. Because don't we all think that marriage is a very serious institution and that people shouldn't walk away from it because of a burnt kugel? Or that people shouldn't be, in the context of their marriage, they certainly shouldn't, be, interviewing, other future candidates. We think that that's, morally problematic, obviously.
How do we explain the other candidates? I don't recall that. Did we explain that? Or did Rabbi explain the other candidates? I mean, why would someone be looking at other candidates if they're married?
Right. So the answer, no, of course that's wrong. The question is, and if that happens, is that a good reason? Is that an acceptable reason to divorce? Right? So
it should be the opposite. You should be punished because you did something wrong. I'm saying I would use reverse psychology.
Okay, but you yourself have just gone mikatse ela katse.
No.
From one extreme to the other.
No. If the relationship is toxic, but this is not a toxic relationship. This is where
So my answer to your question
you're upgrading your car.
Right. So if I'll explain the Pnei Yehoshua in more detail in just a minute, but the answer to your question is that, even if it's improper, once the reality is that somebody's, has basically emotionally, left his marriage, and that he's already, seeking
checked out
other options, there's that's about as toxic, as it gets.
I think
instead of punish, who are you going to punish, if you force this marriage to continue, right?
Rabbi Gershon was the Mishnah was written long before Rabbi Gershon introduced his prohibition on marriage beyond a single wife.
Okay, we'll get to that in a second.
Which means that we have to take into account the interpretation of the Tanoim and the Mishnah in the light, not of I like somebody else, therefore I got to get rid of you in order to get somebody else.
Right.
But you can have both.
You know what? Not only you're right, but that I find it difficult. But what you just said is what the Rambam says in Pirush Mishnayos. Okay, so why don't we get right to it? So before we do, so let me just go back for one more second. We have three views in the Mishnah. Let me just tell you how the default, how most people take it, and then we'll analyze fully how we've been developing it. So the three views in the Mishnah, are there three or are there two? I mean, there are technically three views. The question is how to break it down. So the view of Beis Shammai highlights, being machmir for respecting the institution and trying to, preserve, marriages, and to kind of avoid especially trivial or, grounds for divorce as much as possible. So there's something very admirable, even if we don't think it's completely workable, about the position of Beis Shammai. The question is, Beis Shammai, who say you need ervas davar, betrayal of the marriage, there are two questions to ask. Number one, if not, the divorce is invalid or it's just improper and he shouldn't have done it, but it works anyway. That's question number one. Question number two, is Beis Shammai's very strict laws only applicable to a first marriage or even to a subsequent marriage? This question. Number three.
The Gemara on that page, that Tzaddik,
yeah,
at the bottom refers to the fact what?
To first and second marriages.
Yes.
But it's not clear whether
distinction between the two.
Right. But the Gemara makes the distinction in terms of the crying of the Mizbeach. It doesn't make it clear that the distinction has to do with Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel. But there are Mefarshim, Rishonim, and Achronim who took those two things and put them together. I'll show you soon. So the question, what I want to do is I want to analyze each one of these positions. So we have three positions. Let's just say it this way. Beis Shammai gets credit for the seriousness with which they, relate to the institution of marriage and trying to avoid any kind of frivolous or casual, negation, of this serious institution. They get a lot of credit. The question is, did they go, and this is what Jacob is really asking, did they go too far? Because there can be other conditions other than a betrayal of the marriage in which, objectively, the toxicity, the sanctity, of the marriage has been compromised, and therefore it's just not productive, even halakhically, from a sanctity point of view, to insist under those conditions, that the marriage, be preserved. So that's different than saying, I don't understand Beis Shammai at all. We understand Beis Shammai. There's a lot of, admirable, constructive, sentiment in Beis Shammai. The question is, how far did Beis Shammai themselves take it? We'll get to that in a minute. And, is there some balance in between? But when you look at Beis Hillel and Rabbi Akiva, you have the opposite problem, right? On the surface, you're thinking, this is too casual and too frivolous and too trivial. And, it makes a mockery, of what's supposed to be a very foundational and serious, relationship. And, it's just hard to understand, why, they would, use these kind of examples. On further reflection, we have to say one of two things. One is that the conditions that they describe are not as simplistic and literal as they sound. There's more to them. Either the words mean something more, or the alternative is that either imposing limits ends up being more counterproductive than effective, or there's a deeper flaw, that these superficial rationales reflect, and it's that deeper flaw, that really is a justification for the divorce, not the superficial, impulsive,
You know, one of the things that bother me is why is it that the Tanoim did not introduce the obligation that, to children in the marriage when the question of the divorce, the
That's
character.
a great point. That's very good point. That's a great point. That doesn't seem to be like a factor in this.
Why? I mean, it does. It's to me, it's sort of shocking.
Well, I think the answer is because I think we're not. I think there are two different questions here. One is what constitutes proper grounds for divorce. In the end of the day, that's one. And number two is what is our posture about somebody who divorces when the grounds, are not justified. We'll see soon. The Gemara says, "Sanui, hamishaleach," that somebody who divorces his wife without cause, is a reprehensible person, even though the get is chal and the grounds are valid. So I think the question of children playing a role, and of course this is a very naughty, Knotty, naughty issue, it always has been, and it is, ad liyamenu anu. Namely, and psychologists over the years have, kind of changed, their view, but every case is singular, obviously, and there's no easy answer. Like back in the day, I remember, some decades ago, the conventional wisdom, when people were in this very difficult situation where personal relationships had failed, and if that's all that there were, I'm not talking about even within halacha at the moment, I'm talking about just societal perspectives. So, people would say, well, this is a situation which, justifies a divorce for sure. However, when there are children involved, this idea of remaining in a marriage for the sake of the children used to be, a very strong factor, and even default conventional wisdom. Obviously, there are always, exceptions to the rule. And then in more recent decades, the psychological consensus in the mental health, I guess, community is that, is to challenge that, and that often, for the children welfare itself, right, being in an environment,
right. If it's toxic, it's not good for them.
What's that?
If it's really toxic, it could actually destroy that.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. So I even my time, there's been a huge shift, like in in the psychological, world regarding that issue. And of course, there always were cases where divorce was preferable even for the children, and there are cases even now, probably, where preserving a marriage is beneficial for children. But in terms of what was the default, conventional wisdom across the board, there's been a huge shift in that, in the last 20 to 30 years, I would say, based on evidence and the impact that it has on the psychological well-being of children themselves. So my answer to Rabbi Roth's question is, I think it's a great point. It's always been and always will be, a factor in weighing, the responsible and the admirable as opposed to the reprehensible, thing to do. But if we're talking about Beis Shammai, Beis Hillel, and Rabbi Akiva, we're not necessarily applauding people's choices. We're talking about, like, what is the minimum grounds, that would make this either valid or at least, minimally, acceptable, even if, we're still critical, of the decision. So that's why I think the children factor isn't part of it, even though deciding what is optimum and what is admirable, it would always be a factor, in one way or another, depending on what the particular circumstances are, number one, and what the conventional, wisdom, in terms of the society is about long-term effects and impact. Yeah, there was another question. Was there a question? No. Okay, so let's go through Rabbi Akiva and Hillel, and Shammai one by one to try to understand what it is that they're saying. Before we do, let's just read a little bit of Gemara, and then we'll talk more. But some of the factors that Rabbi Roth brought up, that Jacob Gold brought, these are factors that we've started to analyze, and we'll get back to them. Rabbi Roth's comment about polygamy is something I'm going to get back to. Just give me a couple of minutes. But I mentioned that the Rambam addresses that in Pirush. I'll just tell you what he says for a second, and then we'll read it inside soon. But in Pirush Mishnayos, the Rambam says that he paskins like Rabbi. I'll read it inside. The Rambam says that he paskins like Hillel, like the position of Hillel. In the Mishnah Torah, it's not so clear that he paskins like Hillel on this issue. But then he makes a comment about Rabbi Akiva. If you have the Mar Makomos in front of you, which I hope you all do, this is on page 5. Page 5. Page 5. There are two Me'iris on that page, but it's the first one. So it should be this is when the Meiri was one of the Chachmei Provence. He lived in southern France and wrote an important work, Beis Abachira. His work, like that of many of his contemporaries, was shaped by or impacted by the influence of the Rambam, which doesn't mean he doesn't disagree with the Rambam, but he's always working off of the Rambam. Anyways, in his work, whenever he starts a commentary on the Mishnah, he always begins with the Rambam's commentary on that Mishnah. Rambam wrote a work called Pirush Mishnayos, commentary on the Mishnah. So you can find it in the back of the Shas Gemara, or it's published separately, or it's published on Mishnayos, but the Meiri always quotes it faithfully too. So if you look here, Beis Abachira Meiri, he says, Amar Haram. Everybody have that? Amar Haram. Haram is Rabbeinu Moshe, mean the Rambam. Beis Shammai Yitlu B'mila Erva. Beis Shammai's hanging their hat, literally their position, on the word erva in the pasuk. Erva implies, znus, adultery, betrayal of the marriage. Beis Hillel ba'amro davar. Beis Hillel, as we'll see in a minute, relies on the fact that the word, it says ervas davar or dvar erva. The word davar means thing, meaning not just erva, other things as well. Umama Rabbi Akiva, this is very, very rare. I don't recall any other Rambam like this. That doesn't mean that there aren't any other Rambams, but at least on off the top of my head, I can't recall it. The Rambam says Rabbi Akiva's position, bilti emes. Wow, it's not true. It's an incorrect position. The Rambam is not in the habit of calling out Tanaim. He might be in the habit, and he is in the habit of making decisions, of ruling, and telling you what he thinks, is the psak. But to say about a Tana's view that it's bilti emes is rather strong. And we're talking about Rabbi Akiva, not just any Tana, one of the most prominent of the Tanaim. Why is it bilti emes? So Rabbi Roth could have written this Pirush Mishnayos, although I don't think Rabbi Roth would have said that Rabbi Akiva's position was bilti emes, right?
God forbid.
Exactly. So, but why does he think it's bilti emes? Because of what you just said. Lefi shehu kasher matzah tova hemena, when he finds a better candidate, yishena alav, v'lo yagare zos. Because like Rabbi Roth said, this is the period before the Cherem Rabbeinu Gershom. So
do you mean Yisraena?
Polygamy was possible. We'll get back to this in a minute. V'hilo chatat klal, his wife didn't do anything wrong. V'hi ne'utala midotav, and she's a fine, upright person, and they're probably even, compatible. If you take it the most narrowly and literally, matzah isha na hemena, meaning he's, it's nothing against wife number one, just that he found somebody superior. So says the Rambam, he could marry her. Not now, but necessarily, but certainly not in the Ashkenazic world. But, then he says, V'halacha k'beis Hillel. But it's a little harsh, because even if polygamy in that time was permissible, no one ever said that it was ideal. Number one, there are economic issues, which the Gemara itself even discusses, right? Number two, there are emotional, difficulties and issues, and certainly it's not an idealistic approach. Again, Yaakov Avinu, had many wives. Yaakov Avinu, if he had his druthers, probably would have only had one wife, But, the way that the circumstances unfold, that was hashgacha, and that was, how he was, his legacy and destiny was to produce the 12 shvatim. But typically, just even if polygamy in its time was permissible, no one ever said that it was, economically or emotionally viable, or that it was, ideal. So for the Rambam to say that Rabbi Akiva's bilti emes, because of the option of polygamy, is rather shocking, frankly.
By the way, I read someplace that Rabbeinu Gershom did not issue that prohibition on multi-marriages until the people themselves, out of poverty or because of other considerations, were already not married to more than one woman.
Oh, really? I mean, it was formalized.
It was a justification of existing practice.
Of a de facto reality already.
Yes.
Interesting. It's very possible. Either way, it's a very strange Rambam. What can I say? But, the Rambam also assumes something about Rabbi Akiva. And that's what Rabbi Akiva says, matzah isha tova hemena, or matzah noah hemena, right? That, even though he says it in a positive way, that it doesn't betoken some sort of incompatibility, with the first wife. And that's not the way that others see it. For example, the Pnei Yehoshua, who I made reference to before, I'll tell you why he says it in a second, says that Matzah Isha Noahimena is a function of the breakdown of the relationship with his current wife. Otherwise, he wouldn't be feeling that way. However, says the Pnei Yehoshua, for whatever reason he feels that way, and whether it was appropriate for him to be in the situation, either in terms of his, relationship with his wife, or just propriety of the way that he conducted himself, within his marriage, the reality right now is that he is what's called, a grushas halev, in a sense, meaning he stopped relating to his wife, as someone for whom he has, either respect or affection. And, the result of that, there's no turning the clock back. It's not like, oh, we'll punish him or we'll, give him a musar, talk, maybe, but assuming that doesn't work. So the reality of matzah isha noahimena is that to continue the relationship, going back to, Jacob's question, but Jacob's question in the opposite direction, if he has this kind of, a roving eye, we'll say, and, the relationship in his marriage is such, that from his point of view, the marriage is over, then, even if he's not an admirable person, to have allowed himself, to be in this, situation and to be feeling these emotions, in the end of the day, it's also beneficial for his wife in terms of her respect, and
but on the other hand,
going forward,
on the other hand,
that a divorce ensue. So the Rambam doesn't see it that way. The Rambam thinks that the situation is that the marriage is perfectly fine, and he has an additional interest, which from if there's a heter of polygamy, could be satisfied. Pnei Yehoshua is saying exactly the opposite, actually. So it's actually an interesting question. I mean, the Rambam thinks that Hillel is more acceptable than Rabbi Akiva. The Pnei Yehoshua says exactly the opposite. And actually, it's a very interesting, issue for the following reason. Look at the Rajba. Just one second.
But Rabbi, just
Yeah.
in other words, if we would prevent him because he has a gazing eye, if we would say you have a gazing eye, you can't marry the woman, that might prevent people from gazing. That's where I was going. But like
No,
the
I understand.
Torah,
I understand.
we have rules, right?
Right. But the point is not so much even the question of marrying the other person. That's not what's at stake. The question is, can he divorce his first wife? She's may very well be better off, at this point, because there's a certain toxic, obviously relationship between them. And for him to continue to live with her, when he doesn't feel respect and affection for her, is to encourage her exploitation, right? So you're talking about like making a knas that he shouldn't be able to marry.
Yeah. Well, what I'm saying is, maybe from what we've been learning,
Right.
like divorce was a mechanism to get out of a toxic relationship. Right here, this is a case where someone did something wrong. They have a gazing eye. They went out and tried to seek something they shouldn't have, and we're rewarding them. That's where I'm coming
We're not
from.
rewarding them, but
We are.
But
We're
remember
saying,
what
go ahead, get out, and do what you want, and then go gaze a third time. You can do it 1,000 times.
Right. But remember, let's consider what the alternative is. Right. The alternative is, to preserve a marriage in which the wife is already has been treated shabbily, and in which to continue the relationship is to continue, her exploitation.
Right. So in other words, I understand what Rebbe's saying. Like, since he already found someone, we let the woman get out. But
right, that's kind of what the Pnei Yehoshua is saying. He uses the expression grusha salev, which we'll see in the Gemara later on, or nasa einav, lagarsha. Like if a person has already decided that he's getting divorced, we'll see soon in the Gemara, then he's not allowed to continue to, make demands or expectations or exploit, whether it's the shutfus, the partnership that they have in running the household, or he's not allowed to capitalize and take advantage of that. And Kol Sheken, he's not allowed to continue the physical relationship with her.
But like by Sota, we say, for example, you have to leave both. But meaning, I understand.
Yeah, because Sota is a real, actual betrayal of the marriage. So that's where that is a breakdown. That's irreparable. So we say that it's also, you're right, there's this model of what we call asa labal and asa laboel. I mean, she cannot return to her husband because she was unfaithful, and she can't have a future with the individual who broke up the marriage.
Right. So all I'm saying is, I don't recall ever learning this, but if someone's gazing, which I assume the Torah doesn't want to be gazing,
but gazing is not the same as an act of unfaithful.
No, but the Torah is making it like if you gaze, it's perfectly okay.
No.
Right? No, it's saying that you can get out.
No one's saying it's okay.
Go gaze and go
No,
forward.
no. No one said go gaze.
Those are the words.
That's what the Gemara says. Sanui mishalcho. We consider this person to be despicable. However, his being despicable doesn't alter the fact that the relationship is already toxic, right? And once the relationship is toxic, then saving it, you're not going to save it to punish him, and you're not going to save it at her expense, and you're not going to save it by claiming that that it's suffused with sanctity when it isn't.
So what does that mean? He's despicable. What does that really mean in the Torah world?
That means in cases where somebody divorces, where it's inappropriate, sanui mishalcho. Mishalcho means is a play on the word. It says v'kasav l'sefer krisis v'shilcha mi beis. So he sends her away. So the Chazal say, we'll see in a minute in the Gemara. that the Mishaleach, the person who sends her away when there's no proper grounds, sanui lamakom. He's like, the Ribono Shalom is very displeased with him.
Okay. So Hashem will take care of him down the road.
Yeah, but the divorce would be valid, and probably under those conditions, it's better, to terminate it, than it is to force, some sort of enduring sham, which ends up being to everybody's detriment.
I'm less focused on the termination. I'm more focused on allowing him to gaze and get away with it.
No one's allowed. That's all very discouraged. That's all inappropriate. Okay, so the question of the relationship between Hillel and Rabbi Akiva is really interesting. Basically, what the Rambam is saying is, I understand Hillel, I don't understand Rabbi Akiva. What the Pnei Yehoshua says is the opposite. Maybe Rabbi Akiva actually is more of a justified basis for divorce than Hillel. Why does he say that? So I'll show you the following. Look on page 4 for a minute. Okay. I'm just going to discuss Hillel and Rabbi Akiva first, and then I'll get back to Beis Shammai. We'll just flip the order a little bit. If you look on page 4, you see Chidushei HaRashba Masechet Gittin Tzadi Omen Aleph. Yes, page 4.
Shtika Kodada.
Okay, so I wish it were the case. So, and in the middle of the Rashba, there's it says Yerushalmi.
Right.
Okay, so Yerushalmi says V'hadava b'nidasa, v'hazav ezovo. I mean, a woman is in a state of nida, right? So she is prohibited to her husband, correct? The question is, there's a debate among the Mefarshim, should she in that period of time, be, beautifying herself, wearing cosmetics. On the one hand, that could be a michshol, that could be a problem that would, encourage violating, the strictures of the state of nida, so what the Yerushalmi says is Kenim Arishonim Omrim Tehei Benidasa Lo Takcho V'Lo Tifkos Ad Shetova B'Mayim. Until she goes to the mikvah, she should avoid, cosmetics and all sorts of things like that, because it would stir up, difficulties. So the Yerushalmi then says Amar Lahem Rabbi Akiva. Misham Raya, Imat Omer Kain, does that make sense? If you say that, Afi Mevias Atzma Lidei Ka'arus, he'll look at her askance, he'll think that she's not, somebody who's attractive. Who knows saying Einav Ba Lagarsha, he'll say, he'll be, maybe he'll be motivated, to seek a divorce. Right? So then the Yerushalmi says something interesting. So the Yerushalmi says this comment of Rabbi Akiva doesn't make sense according to Beis Shammai, because according to Beis Shammai, you're only allowed to, the only grounds for divorce are a serious betrayal of the marriage. This is not a betrayal of the marriage. She's not looking attractive, in the days of her nida, right? But according to Rabbi Akiva is following the position of Hillel. And Hillel said, "Afilu hikdicha tafshilo." You don't need very many grounds, to justify the divorce. So, Rabbi Akiva was hyper worried and sensitive that people will do crazy things for silly reasons. So he said, don't give, you don't want to play into the wrong hands. So, even though she's in a state of nida, she should feel comfortable to wear any kind of jewelry, to take any kind of treatments, etc. You get the idea. So then that's the Yerushalmi. The Yerushalmi basically says the argument between this Kenim Arishonim and Rabbi Akiva is Rabbi Akiva being like Hillel and this Kenim Arishonim being like Beis Shammai. That's interesting. Good. Then the Rashba asks a question. Says the Rashba, B'tema, lama hutzar klomar Rabbi Akiva kebeis Hillel. Why does the Yerushalmi need to say that Rabbi Akiva holds like Beis Hillel here? Ela kedivrei atzmo hoya lo lomar. They should have said Rabbi Akiva is consistent with his own view. Isn't Rabbi Akiva the one who said that, for reasons even of a gaze, gazing eye, a roving eye, whatever it is, meaning physical, appearance or beauty, that's grounds for divorce? I mean, that he can divorce under those conditions? So he shouldn't have said Rabbi Akiva holds like Rabbi Hillel. They should have said Rabbi more effective. Rabbi Akiva l'shitasa. Rabbi Akiva is consistent with his own view. U'divrei Beis Hillel, hadshi matzah ba'ervas davar kagon shekdicha tavshilo. Avon b'shem kir v'nai lo. Rabbi Akiva, the Hill didn't say that the grounds for divorce, if she's no longer physically pleasing. He said, she did something that angered him or annoyed him. Anger and annoy is one thing, and loss of physical or attractiveness is something else. So the Rashba doesn't answer this question. The Pnei Yoshua that I mentioned before tries to answer this question. He says, no, the Rashba is completely wrong. The difference between Hillel and Rabbi Akiva is not, Hillel isn't more serious than Rabbi Akiva. Rabbi Akiva is less admirable, not Rabbi Akiva himself. The grounds, Kalila, the grounds of Rabbi Akiva are less acceptable than the grounds maybe of Hillel, but they're also just different, and they're more entrenched. They're more formidable. Why? He says, Hekticha Tavshilo, we'll get to this, not everybody agrees with this either, but Hekticha Tavshilo is in its literal meaning, is a moment of anger. It's impulse. He's divorcing on impulse. Right? But if you can slow him down and wait him out, hopefully he'll change his mind. So the Pnei Yoshua says, the Nida problem is also an impulse problem. Right, during the time when she, is in a state of nida, right? So she's not going to be clothing herself or applying, other mechanisms, to enhance her attractiveness, and all that, is temporary, and it also has nothing to do with the relationship between the parties. Right, it's an impulse worry. That's Hillel. But says the Pnei Yoshua, the real din of Rabbi Akiva is a much more serious dilemma, because she's a grusha salev. He does no longer sees her long term, as an ideal or an appropriate, spouse. So she's a grusha salev. He's decided to divorce her. So that's much more of a problem. That's not the case of Nida. In both cases, we're talking about physical appearance, but in one case, we're talking about temporary. The other case, we're talking about, his. So the bigger point I'm trying to make is that, while Hillel and Rabbi Akiva seem to be saying similar things, in both cases, there's no objective, halachic flaw in the marriage to begin with, which is the view of Beis Shammai. Somebody behaved inappropriately, toxically, in terms of the expectations of the marriage. That's Beis Shammai. Both Beis Hillel and Rabbi Akiva, which is why everybody has so much trouble with them, it seems like we're talking about something pretty frivolous, or something, that's the fault, not of the wife, certainly, but of the husband. He has a roving eye. He he has a problem, with anger management, that's Hillel and that's Rabbi Akiva. But within Hillel and Rabbi Akiva, there also may be a difference. So let's take it this way. The Rambam thinks that Rabbi Akiva, there's no problem in the relationship. There's just a competitor. That's why he says, in the time of polygamy, this shouldn't have been an issue. But the Pnei Yehoshua is saying, no, the reason that he's matzah isha na'imena is because, he lo matzah chen be'einav, because the first relationship is no longer satisfying to him. That's a serious problem. We may think that's not admirable, right? But in the end of the day, it's more difficult.
So we're making it like he's innocent.
One second. It's more difficult to overcome because he already has a different view of her, and it's a grusha salev. On the other side, where Rambam thinks that there's more justification for Hillel than Rabbi Akiva, Pnei Yehoshua says once there is a situation of Rabbi Akiva, it's actually worse problem and more justified divorce because it's a more serious issue than Ikticha Tavshila. Having said that, as Jacob made reference before, the Meiri says about Ikticha Tavshila that it doesn't mean anger, that she burned his steak or his stew or whatever it is, or his cholet. What it really means is that she and he are not are not accommodating each other. They don't have a harmonious relationship, and they do things that annoy each other, that disrupt their each other's tranquility. Like
intentional.
She whatever. She makes the environment one in which he is uncomfortable or he feels hostility.
Maybe she wants out.
Yeah, maybe. Very well, could be. Meaning the Meiri is saying this isn't what it seems like. It's not a silly impulse anger thing. It's there hasn't been a betrayal of the marriage vows, but there has been a breakdown in the personal relationship between the
because Rabbi,
very painful.
But the whole focus here is about the husband, whether davar, whether it's erva, whether he matzah isha nicer than her.
Because he's the one who has to take the initiative. I think you asked me that last week. So why that is a different question. But he's the one who initiates the divorce. So we're talking about the grounds. She can't force a divorce.
Yes, but
he once and one of the takanas of Rabbeinu Gershon is that he can't force a divorce either. But Minat Torah, he's the one who has to initiate, and he can impose a divorce. And therefore, the Mishnah is speaking about his grounds, but the concern is also for her status in the marriage. That she shouldn't be perceived in a way that is humiliating for her or that is, undermines her.
That's very important, very important.
These are very, very important issues, obviously. So what I'm trying to show is that, I'll say something else. The phrase,
Hillel or Shammai,
yeah,
were to strengthen the institution of marriage.
Yeah.
Why did they accept the fact that shtar krita a man can give without going to the Beit Din? He should have to go to Beit Din, present his case for reasons of divorce. The Beit Din must then establish that he has valid reasons and then permit him only to give a shtar krita.
Well, again, this isn't up to Hillel and Shammai. The psukim in the Torah and Parshas Kitetse, don't, establish that, a divorce can be a decision of the party, and doesn't require the agreement of a bez. Again, midrabanan, after Cher and Rabbeinu Gershom, we do kind of, employ partially, the role of the bez. And I will say the following: if you look in Targum Yonasan ben Uziel on the pasuk in Kitetse, he does, insert in a very fascinating way the notion that a gerushin takes place in a bezdin, or that bezdin is part of the get. And this, of course, is a well-known but minority view of the Noda B'Yehuda in the 18th century. He wrote some tshuvas trying to make this argument that a get requires a bezdin, And in the middle, like in the medieval period, the Orzarua has a tshuva in which he says this. But the majority, and in our practice, we don't, typically allow get outside of a Bezdin context. If a person wants to get divorced, in our time, he always has to, appear in front of a Bezdin, and then, whatever the Bezdin, whatever constructive role they can play, they're supposed to try to play in terms of counseling, in terms of,
right.
But Minat Torah, we're talking about the biblical law for the moment. That's all rabbinic law. Biblical law doesn't say anything about a Bezdin, even though Targum Yonasan kind of interpolates it in there. And you do need witnesses, and it is a legal act. The witnesses part we'll get to. That's discussion of Rabbi Eliezer, Rabbi Meir, what we call Edim Sira Karsi, Edi Chasima Karsi. That's going to be one of our next topics. But all things being equal, the consensus view of the authorities is that on a biblical level you wouldn't need a Bezdin. But Hillel and Shammai and Rabbi Akiva are not. They're bringing their wisdom to bear, their understanding of the of the psukim in the Torah, and what biblical law, what Torah law is. It's not for them, to decide, what they want. It's for them to weigh in based on their deep knowledge of the tradition, and their, also their psychological, insight and so on, how to interpret these laws and how to apply them in the most precise way possible. I will tell you something else. There's a very interesting discussion, a bit of a meta-halachic discussion, if you will, regarding this Mishnah, because typically the images of Hillel and Shammai and Rabbi Akiva are somewhat different, than superficially, the impression that you would get from this particular Mishnah. Like in the bigger, scheme of things, Shammai, was perceived as someone who, was very impatient, had, very little, truck, with kind of the emotional side of, of things, the more, fuzzy and that kind of treating people, with kid gloves and so on. The famous story of the the ger, or the would-be ger, who came to Shammai and to Hillel, the Gemara in Shabbos and Aflam Aleph, and Shammai was very impatient, very short with him. Hillel was the person who, brought him along and, was very accepting and,
he's the more
provided him
nurturing.
with a certain kind of
Hillel is
perspective.
always pictured as the more nurturing.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. That's a good way to say it. So Hillel is the nurturer, and like Shammai is the one with a bit draconian standards, and
Achmir.
how does that fit in, with Shammai, basically saying marriage no matter what, and Hillel saying, yeah, you could just walk away from marriage, these. And Rabbi Akiva, by the way, of all people, we all know the personal story of Rabbi Akiva as it's told in the Talmud, and the devotion, the pivotal role that his wife Rachel played in his late but spectacularly meteoric rise to the top of the rabbinic world from nothing, and his famous statement, Shali, V'shalachem Shalah, giving her all the credit. And people say, the Rabbi Akiva is the one who says that there's a debate about Shir HaShirim. Shir HaShirim is, the Megillah that is so difficult to decipher. It looks like a, like a love poem, It uses the imagery of, a man and a woman, a husband and a wife. But, the question is, like, how does that fit in, to being part of Kisvei HaKodesh? And of course, Rabbi Kiva famously is the one who says that Shir HaShirim is not only Kodesh, but it's Kodesh Kodashim. And, people have made this connection that generally his idealism, his optimism, and especially his appreciation of the marriage, bond and relationship, he felt, oh, that's a good, mashal to the relationship of the Ribono Shel Olam,
Yeah.
which is what the Rambam paskins in Perek Yud Hilchos Tshuva. So, and we're all familiar with other stories about Rabbi Akiva, not only his idealism, but his optimism. I said the Gemara in the end of Masachet Makos, in which Rabbi Akiva, sees the fox running on Harabayas, and everybody is crying, and Rabbi Akiva is laughing, and he sees the glimmer of hope, in it all. So it's interesting. Some Achronim ask the question. They say, the positions of Shammai and Hillel and Rabbi Akiva are out of sync here with what we normally think about them. So I think that there are two, things to say about this interesting question. The first, of course, is, to question whether it's really a question, in the sense that, and this is the answer that I gave a little bit to, Dr. Weg just a second ago, which is that, it's not, Rabbi Akiva and Hillel and Shammai deciding here. It's not personal, primarily. They're interpreting, everybody is trying to read the psukim in Parshas Kiteitzei, and, the other evidence, in the halakha, and, with as much sincerity and objectivity as possible to understand, what the nature of the institution of divorce and marriage is, and therefore what would be proper grounds of, divorce, and how to interpret the psukim of, matzah dvar erva, the imla matzachein be'enav, and so on and so forth. So sometimes, it's expected that people, will be contrary to their own personalities, when they're left, with a certain flexibility, when they are exercising integrity and they're trying to interpret the sources in a way that's Yikov Adin Sahar, whether they are happy about it or unhappy about it, to try to, that's part of Yiras Shamayim too. Levatel ritzoncha l'ritzono, to accept the halacha and to try to reconstruct it as accurately as possible, even when we don't fully understand it, and even when it's against our, our proclivities. That's part of Yiras Shamayim. That's part of fear of heaven. And that's part of halachic commitment. So that's, some Achronim do give this answer. They ask this question. They say, yeah, you're right. Hillel and Shammai and Rabbi Akiva are saying things here that are not consistent with, the kind of, positions that they take elsewhere. But that's because, first and foremost, they're being true to the system, and they're trying to interpret it, objectively and accurately. And it's not up to them. It's not what they want. It's what they believe, the Torah wants. And that's an important lesson. However, getting back to what we've been trying to suggest, and that is, if you look at the Mishnah superficially, like, Beis Shammai, says you're going to ride this marriage out, no matter what, unless it's impossible to save it because, matzah erva, literally there was a betrayal in the marriage. And then Hillel and Rabbi Akiva are saying, no big deal, it's just a marriage. You can walk away from it if you choose. You can do it as a win. If you look at it that way, then you're right. Then the personalities are not in sync, with who they usually are. But what we're trying to explain is that, there's something more than meets the eye going on in these cases, especially for Rabbi Akiva and for Hillel. It's not that Hillel is saying it's easy to walk away from a marriage. Hillel may be saying the opposite. The best way to ensure happy and sanctity suffused marriages, is not to make them irrevocable, not to make people feel that they're trapped, so that every small or maybe even serious, significant, difficulties end up getting exaggerated or magnified even further because people think they don't have any options, and therefore the tendency, the example of the being in house arrest that we gave in the Malbim before. Moreover, when people employ frivolous grounds, to walk away from serious, commitments, we should look deeper, and in some cases understand, that we're already dealing with a very flawed, with a very compromised, bond. If things were going swimmingly, and there was a certain, idealistic relationship between, two parties, then, impulse anger or other unacceptable breaches, in loyalty and in the dignity, that should prevail between a husband and wife, would not exist. So instead of seeing Hillel and Rabbi Akiva, as being, mekilim, they're lenient. They are lenient in one sense. I mean, they're much more flexible in terms of justified grounds for divorce. But the justified grounds for divorce expansion, what I'm suggesting, it may be a function of their idealism and their optimism and their flexibility. Meaning, what Hillel and Rabbi Akiva are really saying is, we want, the marriage is a davar shebekdusha, and therefore, to ensure those standards, right, you just have to look deeper when, there's an interest in divorce. You have to look deeper because it may reveal, that the flaws are already substantial. And if they are, then to perpetuate the marriage under those conditions would actually be a compromise of the optimism and the idealism and the level of sanctity. So actually, Hillel and Rabbi Akiva was, somebody who was shaped by his marriage and had, tremendous appreciation for what that bond, was and could be. And he was saying, if somebody's matzah isha noai menu, we're not rewarding him, and we're not, in any way condoning that, but it's so unacceptable, that there's a glaring already hole, in this bond. And Hillel was saying, I'm optimistic and patient and so on. And consequently, I'm aware that if somebody wants to get divorced because of Ticha Tavshilo, that's pretty toxic. That tells you that there's no respect between these people. And, there's nothing holding them together, that is particularly compelling. And under those conditions, there may not be, something to save in this marriage. So I think both of these things are true. Sometimes you can't anticipate and predict, what Chachamim are going to say, because they always have to try, to put aside their own personal inclinations to interpret the sources with integrity, and to bow to the will of the Ribono Shel Olam. And that's always true. That's number one. And number two is that, what looks like frivolous and trivial often ends up being, a commitment to a higher standard, and a deeper, insight, into what the relationship really is. Yeah.
Could it be, it's not really, the two positions are not kulas or chomers, but rather this.
Yeah, they are. What I'm saying is they're not kulas and chomers.
Right.
Two different perspectives on what really jeopardizes the sanctity in a marriage.
Well, it could be, could you even expand that to say they're taking the view, Beis Hillel and Rabbi Akiva, that it's a failure, Beis Shammai's position, if you have to wait till there was a davar erva.
Yeah.
And so these are canaries in the coal mine, whether or not it's a temporary impulsive thing or a chronic thing. If you let them fester,
right,
one way or the other, it gets to ever. So it's a gerushin that's not based on davar sheba erva is actually preventing one of the worst
Davar
things.
sheba erva, in many
Right. So the davar, it's the avoidance of the davar. It's a foregone conclusion that they're getting divorced on all three opinions. The question is, the last two Tanaim are trying to do something. It's not that it's frivolous, but they're seeing something that is indicating trouble, whether it's even, remember, if somebody's impulsive once, they're impulsive more than once, right? It's not like the guy got angry once for one time only. Probably this is an example of repeated behavior. So even that, so they're both just sort of premonitions, harbingers of an underlying problem. They're saying, why Beis Shammai are you waiting to get to davar sheba erva?
So you're adding really another factor.
Davar sheba erva.
Yeah, you're adding another factor that what I've been saying is that, like, for Hillel and Rabbi Akiva, even though they use the expression davar and not erva, they say there's erva and there's davar, and this is davar, not erva. But what I've been saying more is some of these davars are really erva too, psychologically, and in terms of the loss of sanctity in the marriage and so on. You're saying something even more or different. You're adding to that and saying, moreover, if you don't, nip this in the bud, this davar is going to lead to erva. So in a way, you're
no one would dispute that if there's a davar sheba erva, you're going to allow a gerushin.
Yeah.
So that's not a
finish. Saying why wait? I'm saying that even if it'll never happen,
it's kind of taking the easy way out.
Right. No, I think it's true. You know what? I think all these things are true. I don't think they're mutually exclusive. Like when the Malbim said,
no, I don't think
the best investment you can make, is giving people choice, because if you don't, they'll magnify their problems and feel trapped. And if you give them choice, they'll realize their options and they'll realize that they're not trapped. That's a psychological truth in many cases.
Right. No,
it's
I'm not
also
saying
a psychological truth to say that if somebody does something impulsively once, in many cases, there's a good chance that it's a pattern and a harbinger of things to come. It's also true that
they're not mutually exclusive. The idea, what we're both saying is not mutually exclusive. And I would just say the reason I added this part is because that could be more consistent with Beis Shammai's traditional reputation, meaning he's the charif here. He just says, you know what? If they do davar sheba erva, I'm okay, gerushin. It's not that he's limiting gerushin to that. He's taking sort of the charif the way out. Like, you don't bother me with this. This is where the other two are saying, no. We got to be very careful here. If we don't want to get to davar sheba erva.
So you're making, in addition to all the things that I'm saying about the psychology and the flaw and what it reflects, et cetera, you're saying in a way also Hillel and Rabbi Akiva are like, it's like a siag, so you don't get to, davar sheba erva. And
I'm trying to preserve preserving the nurturing image of.
Right.
I am too, in a practical way.
I am too, but more in more in an abstract way. But I think they're both. I think all these 3 or 4 things are all true. I really do.
Yeah.
Rabbi
I think they're true for
Rosensweig,
different people, and I think they're also in many cases true on different. They're overlapping things for the same people. But they're important. Yeah.
Rabbi, I thought I heard you say earlier. I didn't want to interrupt you, but I thought if someone's looking, they're gazing. That's a problem in the relationship, or did I? I'm going back. No. What I'm saying is a different perspective, which is the fact that they could find someone else inherently creates the flaw in the relationship. That's different than what we were saying a half hour ago, where the person is at fault for gazing. This was, I thought, taking a different perspective, which is the fact that the person could potentially find someone else meant inherently the relationship was flawed. It's a different perspective.
Those are both, that's what I mean by these not being mutually exclusive. I think those are both true. Meaning, if a person is, if a relationship is solid and good, again, there are always, exceptions. There are always people who, I don't know, they just operate in a different way. But ideally, it's if you should. There's a beautiful formulation of the Sefer Chinuch. There's a din the first year of marriage, naki yia lebeso. Shana achas, that a young couple should spend, the first year of their marriage, bonding together as much as possible. Ad kedei kach, that, for example, if there are, tzarchei tzibur, that, let's say, that you're drafted into the army, so you have a year reprieve, the first year of your marriage.
Sure.
Yeah. So the Sefer Chinuch very beautifully, in his description of this mitzvah, speaks about how important it is, for in the first year of a marriage, when there's a certain fragility at that point, and it's all there's a lot happening. There's as we know. For a young couple to grow together, to become habituated to one another, and he says that's an investment, in the future of their behavior also, the kind of things that distract them. What? Right. So he says it's about habituation. It's about a certain comfort, and a certain level of communication. This is ideally, it doesn't always happen this way, but so it's better for Klal Yisrael to give up on having him in the army for a year, or whatever other tzarchei tzibur it is. It's an investment, in family, units, that there'll be this binding and bonding experience, where people come to like a certain, deep understanding and appreciation of each other. And that should, hopefully preclude, situations, which would undermine, a marriage going. Again, nothing is foolproof, obviously, but that's part of the idea here. So both of these things, I think, are true.
What I wanted to mention, Rabbi, one is a little anecdote that Rav Goren Zatzal, always people who were in the military rabbinate, and I served there 2.5 years, he would never take a young man who got married to the reserve force of the rabbinate in the Israeli army because of Shana Rishona. That's just it. Always was that way. At least I remember in my time when he was a chief rabbi, and I think it continued. But that's just anecdotal. It occurred to me that if a man, in other words, to connect Rabbi Akiva Dafka to Beis Shammai, and that is that I can see an element of erva if he sees another woman and he takes a good liking to her, so to speak. Right. There is, and especially the Beis Shammai, who stresses the whole issue, dvar erva or ervas dover.
But it's a different, that's what I was saying before also, but it's a different kind of erva. It's a psychological,
of course it is.
Erva, not an erva which, legally or halachically,
But his mind is turning about that lady.
Right.
I want her. I want to be with her. Yeah.
Right. So that's what we mean by revealing a flaw in the relationship.
Yeah.
And a kind of betrayal. That's what Grushas Halev is. I mean, the halacha, again, I'm sorry, we're taking a little longer than
that is true.
Yeah. But the idea of Grushas Halev, meaning let's say there's the decision has been made that there's going to be a divorce. So at that point, the way that the Gemara says in Nedarim and Daf Chav, and the Gemara here on Daf Tzadi Amud Aleph, that in that situation, to continue to live together, let's say legally they haven't divorced yet. So legally, the argument can be made they're still husband and wife.
True.
And any kind of intimacy would be legally still valid, and the halacha is very vociferous, in condemning that, because they call it grushas halev. It's depicted not in halakhic terms, but in hashkafic terms, philosophically, as a kind of betrayal of the marriage vow. It's not. It's between the parties who are still married. The divorce has not yet been implemented. But of course, the idea that the intimacy of husband and wife is supposed to reflect that sanctity and that bond and that deep understanding that was nurtured on Vinaki Lebeso Shana Achas, that is cynically gone. Just like we talked about Machzir Grushaso, being a cynical manipulation of the institutions, opposite of the purpose that they were, created. Like you go to divorce and marry and divorce and marry just so that you can, do whatever you want. That's the opposite of what the Kedusha of marriage and divorce is about. So too, what's called Grusha Salev or Nasan Einav Legarsha, there are the appropriate thing is at that point for their physical relationship, and also any kind of other commitment of building a family together, however the division of labor in a household is, all of that ends when there's nasanein of lagarsha, because it's exploitation, and it's very cynical exploitation, at that point in time, even though formally and legally, the divorce hasn't yet, taken place. So the halakha is very cognizant of high standards within a marriage. The Rif, again, we'll have to stop in a minute because we're running a little late, but the Rif here, and we'll try to finish this next time. The last Rif in Masachet Gittin, which is the Rif on this daf, quotes the Gemara in, do I have it here? In Masachet Yevamos. Just 1 second, let me see if I have it here.
You have it.
I do?
Yeah.
Where is it?
It's like, I have a different printing, but it's like page 5, I believe.
Yeah. Page 5.
It's under Beis HaBechira L'Meiri.
Oh, great. Thank you so much. Yeah. I mean, we'll finish with this for today, and then we'll try to get through the Gemara next time. Garsin be'perak habal yivimta, the Gemara nibamos. Amarava isha ra'a mitzvah legarsha. Woman who, she's behaved improperly. It's mitzvah legarsha. Shenamar garesh leitz v'yetzei madon. Ki sana shalach am Rav Yulim sana shalach. Rav Yochanan amar sanuya mishaleach. That's what I referred to before. That if there's no grounds for divorce, then we're saying that the person who's initiating the divorce, even if the divorce is valid, but we're saying that he's a despicable character. This is the Rif distilling the Gemara, but I'll show you why I want it in a minute. That there's a difference between a first and a second marriage.
Yeah.
That even the Mizbeach cries when when a first marriage, which had so much promise and idealism, is squandered. Shenemar v'zot shenit tasu sustima et midbeach Hashem. Ve'amartim alma al ki Hashem heid beincha bein eshes nurecha, etc. Begarsin in Perka Cholitz Tanya Rav Elazar ben Yaakov Omar lo yisa adam isha v'daita legarsha. Again, it's particularly difficult to say a person marries someone else and he already is planning to divorce her for whatever nefarious reason. Obviously, that's, by the way, that's Reb Sajagon in his parish on the Torah, says that's the pshat of lo yia kadesh and lo sia kadesh b'bnos Yisrael. It's a person, marries with the intention of it only being temporary. He says, I'll marry her, and then in 3 years I'll divorce. That's, that's lo yia kadesh, lo sia kadesh, according to Reb Sajagon.
Isn't that against the Torah?
Yes, it's a lo yia kadesh, lo sia kadesh. It's a violation of it's a law of the Torah.
It's a posuk.
Shenemar al tacharosh al reacha, etc. And then the final words of the Rif, talking about this issue of divorce and proper grounds of divorce, is to quote the Gemara Nivamas that says, "Tana Rabbanan ha'oeves ishto kegufo." If a person, affection for his wife is equal to that of himself. And he respects her and, behaves, towards her with a certain dignity that even exceeds what he demands for himself. And the final words of the Rif in Masachet, Gittin. It's a Gemara in Yevamos that he's quoting here in the end of Gittin. But the point is, we're talking about grounds for divorce. We're paskening like Hillel and Rabbi Akiva. But the takeaway message is not that marriage is an easily abandoned institution, and that even for frivolous and trivial reasons you're justified in doing that. It's the opposite. It's the goal, the ideal of Abbas Ishto Kigufo Mechabda Yoser Migufo. In the end of the day, that imposes very high standards, and it also requires, in some cases, flexibility, so that people, that can only be nurtured, when there's free will, when people feel that they have choices. But at the end of the day, it's to protect that idealism and to protect those high standards, that we have these different, there's like a legitimate debate about reading the psukim and also psychologically assessing, different circumstances and how, proper it is under those circumstances, but motivated by the idealism of the marriage, to terminate it. And that's a tough question. We're trying in law, we're trying to objectify as much as possible. Individual situations are always, of course, singular, always unique. But at the end of the day, the goal, according to the Rif, is, ahavas ishto kegufo, mechabda yoser migufo. So that, it's important to keep that in mind, even as we're, grappling, with these tough questions. Okay, so I hope to go through the Shaklavataria and some of the, other nuances, especially from Beis Shammai, but next time. And then, we'll start moving to the next topic of, what is a get, what kind of contract it is. Okay, so everybody should have a great week. And
Thank you, Rabbi.